Mike, we're going to talk about effective training programs. How important is training?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely important here. And my share wasn't working, so I'm just gonna reshare here.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm coming to you live from
Coming
Central
to you.
Utah, and down here in Manti right now, actually. Getting ready to do some visits here with some members, and we're gonna talk about safety and training programs here with these folks. You folks here in the central part of the state, and this is part of our offerings that we offer here at the trust is training and things like that. You probably know that from taking a lot of courses from Jason in the past, and we're going to talk today about what we can do to make these programs just as effective as possible for our members, and for you guys out there in the field, what you can do to make your training programs effective in your agencies. Um, First thing we've got to do with training programs, we've got to identify the required trainings that we want our staff to go through. And it's important that we write these things down and we say, okay, when you're in this position, you're working in this job, you're doing this kind of work, these are the required trainings for you to go through. We got to identify who is not only going to attend those trainings, but who is going to put on those trainings. Is it going to be facilitated by someone inside the office who's got the knowledge and experience that's able to do that? Is it going to be someone in the human resources department who is going to come in and talk about your employee handbook and things like that? Or is it going to be a supervisor in the public works department talking about trenching and shoring? Or are you going to get in touch with Jason and I? Say, hey, you guys come out and help us out here, do a training, attend one of the trust, legal briefs or the training programs that we have that are online here at the trust. We have so many offerings. We'll talk about resources here at the end of the presentation, but it's important to identify what our required trainings are going to be within each of our organizations. What kind of frequency are we going to do? Are these a yearly training? Is it going to be a biannual training? Or is it just, when you get hired or when job duties change? It's important, whatever we decide with any of these required trainings, that we document it. We document what trainings are required and we stick to that documentation. We stick to those guns. Okay. If we identify a training that we think is important and is required for all of the employees when they go through this, God, we can't just skip it because we think that we need this person out on the job immediately. We've got to make sure we train them and we train them effectively and stick to our guns and make sure that we're consistent with these programs as we're going through. So, what training is required then? As we're talk required trainings, what is required? It's important that we identify the required versus recommended. Okay. Now, when we talk about required training, look at the OSHA standards. We're going to talk a lot of today about the OSHA standards on what training is actually required of folks inside of the organization. And then what training would be highly recommended? Okay. Think about the topics that would be required or recommended. And then the job specific type of trainings that are required for folks. Now, we talk training, and you could say training happens upon first hire or when you move to a different job type of responsibility, you get a promotion, you switch departments, something like that. But what about retraining? Now, retraining is almost as important as initial training. So retraining isn't something that just happens when an accident happens, okay? We highly recommend that if an accident happens, that there's a retraining that happens for that employee. So let's say an employee was involved in a backing accident, okay? And we have gone through defensive driving with this person and vehicle backing safety. Now they have a backing accident a few months later. I think it's important that we put this person through retraining. Obviously something didn't stick or else they wouldn't have had the accident. Okay. So retraining is very important there. Also, retraining is important even if an accident didn't happen. So think about a training that was required upon first hire, but we haven't done it in months or years because we haven't had an accident. We haven't needed to use that training or whatever it is. Okay. Things get lost. We forget things. Things like CPR training, for example, is one of those it's a great training that everyone should go through, but it's also something that needs to be retrained on. Okay. And there have been studies that have shown with CPR training in particular that folks who go through CPR training lose about 60% of that training within 1 week of having that training initially completed. So, what does that mean? That means we got to constantly be retraining, just refreshing and talking about some of these things. Okay. That's what we mean by the retrain. It's that we make sure that we're always on top of our game, that the training isn't just a one and done type of thing, but we keep going with the retraining. And we'll talk about some retraining requirements that OSHA has in place for some of our different programs. Okay. Now about who should do the training. What we mean about do the training is who should lead that training. Okay. Now there's a couple of different categories of people here. We have qualified folks, and then we have competent folks. Now, when we talk qualified, somebody could be qualified by going through a course, by having on the job type training. They can have a certificate on the wall that says they're qualified and they've been through it. Okay. Now, you guys have probably been in many trainings with somebody who is a qualified trainer, somebody who has gone through a course and they've said, you know what? You've done this, you completed all the requirements, you've done an excellent job in your practice training or whatever, and you passed the course and you're now qualified to train. Okay. And then you've gone through those trainings with some of those qualified people, and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, this person, they shouldn't be doing this training. Yeah, they might be qualified for it, but are they necessarily competent? Okay. Have they got the maybe the real life experience? Do they have a presence in them where they can command the room, where they can effectively get forth the information that they're trying to get forward to? Or are you just going through a death by PowerPoint where they're just reading off the slide and you're not engaging with the audience or things like that? We've seen that. A lot of us have been to conferences, we've been to trainings, we've been to things where you think, all right, this is going to be a great session. Somebody's going to do a really great job here. And you walk out of there thinking, God, I wasted 40 minutes of my life. Okay. There's a big difference here between qualified and competent. Somebody who is competent is somebody who not only is qualified, they have the know-how, they have the ingenuity, they know what to do, they've been through the ringer a time or two, but it's also somebody who can command the room, who can make the training engaging, who can relate the training, who can make sure that everybody is getting out of it what they're trying to put into it. And now, when we talk about different kinds of trainings, there's also different medias you can use. Online training is highly effective in some sense. Okay, you're able to reach a greater number of people and a larger number of people, big audiences from a from without having to go out and travel to meet those people, or having to work around different schedules and get everybody in a room all at the same time. Online training can be very, very effective for some people. Other people need the in-person and the hands-on type training. Okay. Sometimes those are just better, where we can get into discussions, where we can talk about certain things and topics, um, and things of that nature. For example, you'll see some of the trainings that we offer here at the Trust that Jason and I do. We only offer it in person. We don't necessarily offer it as an online version, just because it's so much more effective being done in person. We can talk, we can discuss, we can have a conversation around some of these sometimes difficult topics. Okay. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat here. This statement here at the end, understandable to the employee, is what we should be aiming for with any kind of training we do. Some people, like I said, they might react well to that online training. Other people need the in person and the hands on and the discussion type thing. We have to make sure we take the temperature of our team and we make sure that it's understandable to that employee. Okay. Because if we've been going through the online training and it's not working, or we're still having issues, or somebody's still having an accident because they've just gone through an online portion, maybe they need something different. Maybe they need the in person or the hands on type training. Now, there are many in here who would, I mean, we talk about different kind of learners. Okay. Now, me, I'm a visual learner. Like, I've got to be able to see it. I'm kind of slow that way. You got to show me how to do it and show me how to do it many times before I'm probably going to get it. Now, my wife is so much more confident than I am. She is just incredibly brilliant. And you could just tell her how to do something. She could watch a video, she could listen to somebody explain something. She's going to know exactly what to do and how to do it. Me, I'm going to need you to explain it to me, get hands on and get down and dirty with it before I really get how to do something. Okay. We had a good experience with this a few years ago. We bought our first house and they hadn't put in the irrigation system there. So my wife and I, we'd never laid irrigation before, never laid the sprinklers and all that stuff. Put together the valve boxes and all that stuff. Never done that. And so what did we do? Well, my wife, she goes online, she watches a video, and she's good to go. I had to go and I had to watch those same videos at least 20 times. Spent about 8 hours looking at training and making sure that I felt okay with going and doing it. Went downstairs. I finally felt okay. Went downstairs and it's almost done. My wife has put together everything, done everything, put the valve boxes together, got all the pipes and irrigation laid, got the sprinklers in, the risers up, and she's all done. And this is the time when our daughter was only a year old. And man, she let me have it. That she did everything, and I didn't do anything because I needed to be trained in a different way. And she said, by the way, Aria, she needs her diaper changed. Now you can go and take care of that since I did all these sprinklers. So you can see we've got very different learning styles, her and I. So we need different kind of training sometime. She could just see it and be able to go. I'm gonna need in person, hands on, get down and dirty with it. So it's very, very important that we take the temperature and really build the training to our folks in our departments. Now, around frequency of the training, it really depends on the topic. Okay. OSHA has specific standards that require when we are going to go through those trainings. Okay. What the OSHA standards mainly say is it has to be done upon initial hire. But then other times you have to have an annual refresher. Other times you have to have a biannual refresher. Other times it's when your job duties change. Okay. It really depends on the topic. Now, when we talk frequency of training, for example, when you talk about harassment prevention training, now the state of Utah, the employees of the state of Utah, they require that they go through harassment training once every 2 years. Now that's a great best practice. There's no code, there's no law for us as state government as local government agencies that says when we as like a city government or a special service district or a county, when we have to go through that kind of harassment training. Now, what we come to say is if the state requires it of the state employees every 2 years, maybe that's a good best practice. That's something to look for as best practices and see what about frequency of training do we need to have so that we can make sure that our employees are understanding these topics that we want them to get. So, like harassment training once every 2 years is a great annual refresher. Defensive driving training, maybe that's an annual requirement that we require everyone to go through if they have responsibility to drive. They've got to go through it annually. Okay, initial training and then annual refreshers. Okay, but really it depends on the topic. Look at the topics and really rely on these OSHA standards and then the best practices of folks around. If you've got questions on frequency of training, how often should we be doing this or whatnot? Get in touch with Jason or I. That's what we're here for. We're here to help, here to provide some recommendations on what we're hearing, on what we see around the trust. Jason's been around a long time. Not saying Jason's old. Jason's experienced. Jason knows his stuff, and he's been around and he knows by talking with you guys as local government agencies and working in the field for so long some frequency questions you could that we can help to answer some of these things for you. Now, you may want to think about organization type of specific trainings. Okay, you've got these required trainings that we required to do. We have to do these things because they're OSHA required. Okay, now we're talking about the recommended things. These are very specific to you and your organizations. What you want to do is you want to identify trends inside of your organization, and we can help with that. We can help with giving you some data on where your injuries are coming from, where your accidents and vehicles are coming from, and things like that that you can maybe look at building trainings around. What were the causes of these accidents? Were they a backing accident? Was it somebody failing to yield the right of way? Was it somebody not using their PPE? Okay, we can help with these kind of organization specific type questions to say, what kind of training should we recommend here in this city? Okay, now we want to look at the high risk type of activities. What are the things that we doing that are high risk inside the organization? Are we getting in a trench? Are we going in a confined space? Are we driving? Are we using fire extinguishers? What are the things that are organization specific that we need to focus on? Okay. So really look and identify where your people are getting hurt, where the band-aids are, where the duct tape is, the things that we need to get ahead of. And working inside of your safety committees is very important when you're identifying these organization specific type recommended trainings. Okay. Your safety committees really help to drive these trainings because they're there. They're reviewing the incidences. They are very well aware of where we're running into some kind of an issue or need additional training. So work with this safety committee. That safety committee is essential in helping us have effective training programs because that's where we identify the trends, where we identify how we can help and be better. Doing our incident investigations inside of those safety committees, that's where these come from, guys. That's where these organization specific trainings come from. We just didn't train enough. We need to do more for the employees so we don't have this type of accident again. Okay. So running and having a good, solid running safety committee is important as we go through and build out these effective training programs inside of our organizations. A training matrix can be a very helpful tool to use. Okay. It can help us to track the frequency of when we're going to train folks, help us to maintain the schedules and things like that. But any kind of training matrix, we should really break it down by position, by department, and then furthermore by employee. Now, we've got a matrix example that we've been working on here at the Trust for the last few years. This has been um, one of my topics that I've been working on. I've got it kind of dialed in here. If you'd like a copy of this training matrix, just get in touch with us. Get in touch with myself, Mike at utahtrust.gov. Give me a phone call. Let us know, and we're happy to send out a copy of this. Now, it is a living document. It is something that we can really continually work on and keep adding things and topics to. But this is a great example. Don't take it as the end all be all, but it's a great starting place for us to jump off of and get some ideas on what training could be required or recommended based on the type of work or the position that somebody is in. Okay, so again, if you'd like a copy of this, just drop us a line, let us know, and we're happy to send that over. Okay. Documentation is extremely important when we do training. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Okay. So when we talk documentation, we talk in rosters. Okay. Having people sign in, making sure that they're documenting that they were there for the training. Also, part of your documentation should include the topic that was taught, the date that training was covered, and then who led the training. Okay, was it somebody from the trust? Did we watch the video? Did we go on the YouTube? Was it somebody from our office? Who was it that we brought in and went through this training with each of the individuals? Okay, having these rosters on file with this kind of documentation is very, very important. It helps us to meet the OSHA requirements and standards that we're required to meet. Maybe providing certificates is a good thing. So the people have that documentation that they can take with them and say, I have been through this kind of a training. People like to put that stuff on their walls in their offices and things from time to time. So maybe think about that for some of your required trainings is giving out certifications and certificates saying that somebody has went through a training. They're not required. What's really required and what we would think would be a great best practice, making sure that we've documented very specifically who was there. Now, a lot of times we pass around a sign-in sheet and people will sign their names on it. We've got to be sure to make sure we can read all of those signatures. Okay. So maybe having two areas there, a print area and a sign area, so that we know exactly who was there in each of these trainings. It's important to make sure that you review that roster before you let people go. So if you can't read someone named they put on there because their penmanship's terrible or they were quick and they were trying to get through it and pass it on to the next person, that you can ask the question, hey, who was this in this room that is here that I can't read your signature. Okay, so that we can make sure that we capture everybody who's went through the course with us. Okay, so documentation. If it didn't happen, if it didn't get documented, then it didn't happen. Okay, some standards do require a written certification record. Now, these are OSHA standards. These are things that require task-specific type of certifications. Many of them are. These is what's required of here is not only going through an in-person part, but actually a practical, like on-the-job type work that you're going to do, like on the actual piece of equipment. For example, a crane operator certification or a forklift operator certification. They require a written certification record. So they have to have a card that they carry with them at all times when they're operating the crane or operating the forklift. So really refer to the OSHA standards and to know, do I have to issue a certification? If you don't worry about it. But like I said, it might be nice for some folks to have that kind of written certification on their wall. But there are times when these are required. So just make sure we make ourselves familiar with that. And when we go through and we're trying to figure out what kind of trainings we want to assign, what kind of trainings that we think are going to be recommended or required for our folks, we have to go through what we call a job hazard analysis. Okay. Now that is the employer's responsibility, us as the employer. We have to go through each of these for each specific type of job. And for each type of work that we do, we have to do a hazard analysis and say, what hazards exist in this workplace and what training is there out there that we could do to help our employees become less of a hazard to themselves while they work within this department. Okay. Now, these job hazard analysis they're required, they have to be documented, and these are things that we have to write down. Okay, there many times you've heard them called JHAs or job hazard analysis. Maybe it's a work hazard analysis, whatever you want to call it. We've got to be sure that we go through every type of work that we do and make sure we've done a hazard analysis that says this is the training that's required, this is the PPE that's required when somebody is performing this specific type of job. Okay. If you've got questions on this, please let us know. We're happy to help. Now, here at the Trust, some of the things that we recommend because of the trends that we see here every year that we're seeing coming through. Jason and I get together and we look at our different trends that we see and how we can help and help people prevent these kind of accidents. Now, our recommended training that we think everyone should go through, defensive driving. If you're going to be driving a vehicle, on city time or on county or district time, you go to a defensive driving course. Okay. Whether that's you're driving your own vehicle and getting reimbursed mileage, or you're driving a city, county, or district owned vehicle. Okay. Everybody who is required or could potentially drive, they should go through defensive driving course every single year. Harassment and discrimination training. Again, I think a great recommendation for this is once every couple of years, just like the state does. Okay. Employee orientations. Everybody should go through orientation as an employee when they first come on duty on what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed where they're supposed to, clock in and all that kind of stuff. How they're supposed to report injuries, how they're supposed to help keep themselves safe. Job specific policies and procedures. Again, somebody who has gone through that job hazard analysis and realized that these are the trainings we need to assign to our folks. That's the recommended training that they need to go through. Other things that are very, very common that we see here at the Trust all the time, preventing strains like lifting and back safety, those kind of trainings that we highly recommend that those things are done every single year. Slip, trip, and fall prevention, highly recommend that you go through that every single year. Okay. Now, there's no OSHA requirement that says you've got to go through lifting and back safety, slip, trip, fall prevention, preventing strains. There is no requirement in OSHA that says you got to go through defensive driving. These are the things that we would recommend as a loss prevention department that you put your people through and that we're getting everybody through every single year is these kind of recommended trainings that is going to help our people stay safe. Okay. Now let's talk about the OSHA requirements. The OSHA training requirements. There's a couple here, a couple of different standards that we look at in local government. Mostly in local government, we look at the general industry standard, which is OSHA, the 29 CFR 1910. That's the OSHA code. Um, but we also dabble a little bit in the construction code, which is 29 CFR 1926, especially when we talk about trenching and confined space and excavations and things like that. Okay, so let's talk about the different training requirements from OSHA and how we identify those required training topics. Yeah, go to their website. Okay, OSHA, www.osha.gov. Okay. You can search any of the specific type of job that you're doing there in the OSHA website, and you'll get the training topics that are required. You could grab the publications, okay, OSHA.gov. You can go to this site right here. We'll put a link to it if you're watching on YouTube. Put a link to it somewhere over in this area. Um, so you can just click and go to get their training requirements in the OSHA standards. It's a big, nasty PDF publication that'll go through. The website is definitely your best bet here, though. Just go. They have a great search function. Click that search function and look at the specific job you're going to get into doing. Now, OSHA requirement trainings that they have every single year. First one is on your emergency action plans. Okay, OSHA code is 1910.38, subsection E, which says an employer must designate and train employees to assist in a safe and orderly evacuation of other employees. Emergency action plan, what the training is required for emergency action plans is that they're required on initial employment, and then anytime their job duties change, but they also say regularly. There we go. They also say on the regular, okay, which it leaves it kind of up to interpretation. That some of these things have to be trained on, have to be trained on the plan regularly. Now, what do we mean by that? I take that to mean annually. And we train annually on emergency action plans, on the things that we follow in case of an emergency. So we make sure that our people stay safe in case there's an emergency that happens, so that we can have orderly evacuations, so that we can make sure that we keep our people safe if there's a fire or an earthquake or an active shooter or something to that effect. Okay, so emergency action plans is one of those that we're required to train on. Another one, occupational noise exposure. The employer shall provide training in the use and care of all hearing protectors provided to employees. Anytime you see shall in OSHA speak in a training section, it means must. It means we have to. We have to do this. So if we require, we've gone through that hazard analysis and we require earphones or earplugs, excuse me, or earmuffs or whatever inside of our organization because of noise exposure, we've got to make sure we train them on the use of hearing protection. Okay, on how to avoid occupational noise exposure. Okay, that's another requirement. Another one is bloodborne pathogen training. Okay, and bloodborne pathogens, you have to be trained on bloodborne pathogens on initial employment and every single year thereafter. Now, bloodborne pathogens is required for anyone who has what we call occupational exposure. Occupational exposure just means anybody who has a reasonable expectation to be exposed to some kind of a bloodborne pathogen sometime during their workday. Okay? Who is that though? That's anybody. Okay? Anybody can be exposed to a bloodborne pathogen. You work in an office, you're like, I'm never dealing with people's blood or other bodily fluids. What if you have a coworker who is cutting an apple at lunch and cuts their finger? Or somebody's on the copy machine and he gets a paper cut. Okay? That's a bloodborne pathogen exposure. So what do we think here? Everyone needs to be trained annually on bloodborne pathogen exposures and how to avoid those things. Others, first aid and CPR. In the absence of an on-site infirmary, clinic, or hospital in the near proximity, okay, everybody has to be trained on first aid and CPR. Okay, what do we mean by that? Got to be trained, got to have that certification. Okay, where do we find that though? Sometimes these are hard to find. Work with your local fire departments. Local fire departments have folks, they have trainers on staff that can come in and provide this kind of first aid CPR training for you. Okay. There's a great resource there in your organization or in your community to provide this for you. Hazard communication. We have to have training on HAZCOM, hazardous chemicals, and have your safety data sheets up to date. This is another required training that OSHA says if you work with hazardous chemicals, you've got to go through this training. You've got to be trained on the chemicals you work with and the safe handling of those chemicals, disposal and storing of those pieces of equipment and those chemicals, and what personal protective equipment is required when using those things. Personal protective equipment, here we go. 1910.138. You have to train when the PPE is necessary and what PPE is necessary. This is when we've done our job safety analysis and said, okay, we require hard hats, or we require gloves, or a them to wear safety eye protection. When do they have to do that? And what kind of PPE do they have to wear for that? They have to be trained on the limitations of that PPE and how to properly take care of their PPE, how to dispose of it if it needs to be disposed of, how to maintain it and store it so it stays good for them. But they also have to be trained, most importantly, on the limitations of that PPE. No PPE is perfect PPE. Okay. They have to be trained on what kind of limitations the personal protective equipment has, using that job safety analysis that says this is why we have to use the personal protective equipment because of this hazard. If you've identified that PPE is required because there's a hazard present, there has to be training provided every year on that personal protective equipment. Okay, let's keep moving here because we're getting time. Respiratory protection. If you provide respiratory protection, or you have folks who are required to use respirators, you have to have a respiratory protection program, and you have to provide training to employees who are required to use those respirators. Again, if you have the respirator mask and you're requiring employees to use them, you've got to use the respiratory protection program. OSWAPR training again. If we have hazardous waste operations and emergency response, there's a 24 and 40-hour course that we have to go through. 24 or 40 hours, depending on the type of work we do. And what's required is we have to do 8-hour annual refreshers. There's an annual refresher that we have to go through every year. It's 8 hours long for this HAZWOPER course. Now, Jason does an excellent job of this every single winter, January, February timeframe. We offer the 24, the 40, and the 8-hour annual refresher courses. Keep your eyes out for those for your folks in your organizations who might need this kind of training. Okay. Powered platforms and man lifts, subpart F. All employees who operate working platforms shall be trained. Okay. If you're requiring them to use one of these man lifts, or a powered platform, a scissor lift, you have to be trained on that. There has to be an annual training, or there has to be a training upon initial employment. And then I think it's every 2 or 3 years after that, you've got to be trained on these powered platforms and man lifts. What about forklifts? Forklifts is the same thing. You have to be trained on initial hire. If you're going to be using a forklift or any kind of powered industrial truck, okay, a forklift, a pallet jack, an electrical pallet jack is considered a powered industrial truck. You have to go through initial training on that. You have to have hands-on training. You have to have an evaluation process done where you actually get on the truck and work through things. And there has to be a refresher done on that forklift every 3 years. So initial employment, and then every 3 years thereafter, you've got to have a written certification that says that you've gone through forklift training. Okay. Again, the OSHA standard 1910.178 around powered industrial trucks. This is the thing we've got to go through to make it required for us. Lockout tagout's another one. Okay, control of hazardous energy. This is for anyone. We have two kinds of categories here: authorized and affected employees. Authorized employees are those who are authorized to lock out and tag out the equipment, and then affected employees are those who could be affected by a lockout or a tag out situation. Okay, they have to go through the energy control procedure and how we lock out the energy so that somebody doesn't get hurt in the case of a unplanned release of hazardous energy. Okay. Others, toxic and hazardous substances, subpart Z of the code. If they're working around asbestos, lead, and any other kind of toxic or hazardous substance, that's another annual training or another required training they have to go through according to the OSHA code. Confined space entry. If we're getting into confined spaces, we have to make sure that we go through the required training here. Okay, the code says we have to go through the training upon initial employment, and then regularly. Okay, regularly, what we tend to take is annually. We go through this on an annual basis. Knowledge and skills necessary for the safe performance of the duties assigned is how the code reads. What about fall protection? Training program is for each employee who might be exposed to fall hazards. We have to go through the fall protection systems, how we properly put on the harnesses and wear the things, and how we protect ourselves from falls in the workplace. Okay, now we're getting into construction code here. Scaffolding. Each employee who performs work while on a scaffold has to be trained. This is another requirement for motion. So you can see we've got a lot of requirements around these OSHA trainings that we've got to make sure that we're getting our employees into. Trenching and excavation safety. Competent person has to give this training. A competent person is the person, you remember, sufficient knowledge, attitudes, and skills in order to make sure that they know what they're training. They're able to capably identify the hazards inside the organization. And training, trenching, and excavation safety, again, one of those things that has to be done regularly. All right, lots of stuff here, but I don't want you to feel too burdened here. It's a lot. I know, I get it, but we're here to help. Okay. That's what Jason and I are here for. We do monthly trainings. We do these monthly webinars every month. We do a safety moment webinar every single month that covers these and more topics. Okay. We do regional trainings, harassment training, defensive driving, we trenching and shoring, confined space. We do these as regional trainings to help you. So if you see those trainings out there, when we push those trainings out, please sign up for them. Get your folks to come out. Please attend. That's what we're here for. We're here to help and do these things through these monthly and recorded webinars. When you see them up on our Eventbrite, or when you see the email come out from Jason around these monthly trainings, really encourage your staff to sign up. Get out and sign up for these trainings. We have a lot of online options for you. We record all of our trainings, like Jason said earlier. They're on our YouTube channel. You can go and you can pull those down. But one of the things that we recommend is to really dive into our Treliant learning management system. We pay for this system for all of our members. It's completely free for you. And we take care of all your licenses and everything you need. If you haven't been set up with the Treliant learning management system, get in touch with Jason or I. We put all of our trainings here. This makes it very easy for you to get in and track when employees have taken the trainings, when they might need a reminder to take a training because they haven't done it. It just makes it great on you if you're going through like a matrix and saying, okay, I want to make sure that we get all of our recommended and required trainings done, that we make sure that this Treliant LMS is a way for us to make sure that we can track these effectively for our employees. So if you haven't been set up, please get in touch with Jason or I. We are happy to help. Okay. So as we go through our summary here, think about any questions that you might have and type them into the chat box, and we'll see what we can do to answer those for you. But really, I mean, let's identify those required trainings. Go through that job hazard analysis, that job safety analysis, whatever you want to call it, and identify what trainings should be required from folks inside each of these different positions that we have. Determine the best method of that training. Is it going to be online or is it going to be in person? Are we going to invite Mike and Jason to come out? Are we going to send them to regional trainings? Okay, what are we going to do so we can make sure that we get our staff trained on what we need to do? And make sure, most important of all, that we document it. Document the trainings that we have our staff go through so that we can make sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep our folks safe.